I'm so glad you're here to join us this evening, this beautiful evening, as we celebrate together this great hymn of Amazing Grace. I hope you're doing great tonight. I hope that things are, it's been a good week so far. We've gotten to Wednesday, which means there's just 2 more days to go till the weekend. For me, Friday's off, so I only have 1 more day to go for the weekend. So I hope you're feeling the excitement and the joy that we all need to feel this time of the week, because we've made it through this part and we found God somewhere along the way. Maybe we didn't find God. That's why we showed up tonight, to see if we can find him this evening. This is going to be a great one, these 2 verses that we're going to roll over here, because I really want you to get excited about this time. I mean, remember we talked about it last time. I know the first verse. You know the first verse. I bet because of someone's funeral, for me it was my grandfather's, you probably know the last verse, because it means so much in that really acute time of life when grief hits us. I wonder if you know the middle verses. I mean, we've done a couple. Tonight we're going to do the next couple, and we're going to really kind of try to embrace this so that we know what we're singing. Most of the time we're thumbing through the pages. Maybe we're singing the harmonies if you've been chorally trained. You're trying to change it up a little bit, see what happens. But remember that this is a story. Remember, this is a poem that was written before it became a hymn. Remember, this was a litany where people in church would read it like we read the Apostles' Creed. And it was written by a man who was lost out at sea on a slave ship, no less, with the waves battering against him, in a life that truly was wretched. And you would think that in that dark night of the soul, when he cried out to a God that he didn't know, and he lived, and God blessed him, you'd think he'd give up his old ways, the ways of the trade of selling human life. You'd think he'd give all that up. Not right away. It takes the Spirit a while to sometimes change us, to transform us. It turns out, if you remember from our first night, his voice is what helped to end slavery through Wilbur Wilberforce in England. But in order for him to get to the end of there, from the wretched night of a wretched business, and maybe one of the most deplorable things we can do as humans is to sell another human, to transform change, to a change where he's an activist that's teaching people about the love and the saving grace of God and how we see each other equally, how we value each other together. In that process, there's a journey that he had to go on. Maybe that's the most important part of this hymn, right? I mean, we can go into John Newton's history. We can go into the wretchedness of his past, and you can look into that as you kind of do some research. But he changed. I don't think you get from that dark night of the soul by yourself. Neither did he, which is why he wrote a song about amazing grace. A grace that was with him when he was making deplorable decisions. A grace that was with him later as he became a pastor of the church, right? And was grace in all of the hardships between then. It may not cause the hardships, but it was there to lift him out and into something new. We start in the first verse here. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. It's a summary of about what we're about to see in the next verses. I once was lost and now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. It's a summary of what's going to happen in these next verses. Last week, as a refresher, 'twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. So he started in a place of fear, of awe, maybe of some remorse, maybe in a place of confession. Who knows where he was feeling? But we give the big summary about how we're lost and then we're found, and then we get into the fear, and we really wrestle with a bit about why would God save me to begin with? Now, you and I haven't been involved in slavery, is my guess and my hope that you haven't been that far down that path. We've had some dark nights of the soul. We've done some things that weren't really correct. We've made some decisions in our life that we aren't proud of. We've been lost. And I wonder, in that feeling of being lost, or that feeling of making a bad decision, of that feeling of treating someone like they didn't deserve, the feeling of, well, you fill in the list, you've got your own life. But in the midst of that, right, maybe we're a little afraid. What happens next as we face the consequences? What happens next as God is there? And then it moves into that next phase in verse 3. Remember, we're still in review here. We're getting ready for the STAR test. It was the TOS test in my day. It was a lot easier than it is now. And as we're moving into the next phase in this, now we got to go through the dangers and the toils and the snares. Because, man, that is what we face. That's in the consequences. That was in John Newton's consequences. He had to live with the racist behavior of his life. And there's danger and toil and snare in that. We have to live with decisions that we make that could be all the way into the word deplorable. Maybe we have to live with the decisions that we make that we're just not proud of and we don't want to talk about it. Hence confession before communion every communion Sunday. And in that consequence, in that life, in the world that we live in, it can be dangerous, it can be toilsome, there's snares in the midst of it, there's all of these things that can throw us off course to the ultimate goal of what really brings us through this. That's the amazing grace of God. The amazing grace of God takes us from being lost and dark and ashamed and afraid. And I can't get out of that on my own, can you? So what is it that pulls us? What pulls us from this place into a place of reconciliation, a place of hope, a place of love, a place of grace? What pulls us into this? Well, let me tell you, it's got a sweet sound to it. It's called that amazing grace. The love of God that says, I'm not going to leave you there. I'm going to pull you out. And in the dangers and the toils and the snares, I've come. It's grace that's brought me safe through that. And grace will lead me home. It's incredible, isn't it? Truly an incredible promise here for you and for me. That from the dark, we come into the light. And you know, we know that story. We got it. In fact, those first 2 weeks are pretty amazing for us because it's a good recap of what we know Christianity to be. It's why we call Jesus not an encourager. It's why we call Jesus not a preacher. It's why we call Jesus more than a teacher. Jesus is a savior, right? The amazing grace of Jesus Christ, it saves us from the dark and moves us into the light. How thankful can we be for that? Then what? I mean, if you grew up in a professing culture where everything was about professing Jesus Christ, you've come down the aisle. Maybe you're in third grade at, a Baptist church, a non-denominational church. You feel that call in your life. So much of my family have done this because they grew up Baptist. And they said, yes, I need to believe. It's a beautiful part of the Baptist, beautiful part of Christianity and faith. Yeah, I feel a call in my heart and I believe. And if you grew up Methodist like I did, in that world, right, we're baptized as a baby and the congregation promises to bring us up to that decision. Either way, right? Maybe you're Catholic and you went to catechism. Maybe you're Episcopal and you had a confirmation class. Maybe you're Lutheran and they waited so that you could make the profession on your own. Whatever that is. If you made it with a class, if you made it by yourself, I don't care. God doesn't care. God just wants you to make the promise. And that's really the transaction of Christianity. You've got to want to see and to feel and to acknowledge this amazing grace that God does for you. God's going to do it for you, but the goal is for you to see it, to feel it, to acknowledge that God is there in your life, not encouraging you and teaching and preaching only. God's saving you. So you got it. You're good, right? We've talked about this through before in Bible studies. You've got your get out of jail free card on this, right? I will not burn. I've got my get out of hell free card on this. I'm good. I've been saved. I know. Now what? Ladies and gentlemen, that might have been the longest introduction to a Bible study I've given but it leads into this next point. You ready? So the Bible story starts now. The Lord has promised something to me now. The verse says this in John Newton's words in this chronological journey that we go on. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as life endures. Now that's something to process, right? Remember the story? He comes out of darkness. He comes out of the deplorability of the trade that he was a part of. He comes out of it. He finally finds God. His life isn't the same now. But what's different? What's changed? Well, there's a promise that's attached to it. Ironically, it's the promises we're talking about on Sunday morning. There's a promise that God makes to us, that every good and perfect gift comes from above. Or the Lord gives good things to those who love him, like we preached about a couple of weeks ago. Or surely I'll find goodness and mercy all the days of my life, as we see in the Psalms, which will be an upcoming sermon series. There's all kinds of goodness attached to our life. I mean, as Christians, you may not have been born an optimist. You may not have been born glass half full. You might not have even liked the movie Pollyanna. God knows my sisters put it on all the time, and I had to watch Pollyanna go through all of her deals. But you know, she always had that beautiful, bright, loving attitude in that beautiful Disney movie, no matter how overplayed it was. And in that world, in that life, in that time, goodness was there for her to find. Goodness is there for the optimists to seek out. Goodness is there for us to say, there's something in my glass and I'm thankful. You don't even have to call it half full, but there's something in my glass and I'm thankful for it. Somewhere in your life right now, the question is it despite all of the darkness that all of us have experienced one way or another in those dark nights of our soul, we came out, we were saved, we received amazing grace. And you know what amazing grace gives to me? A chance to look at the world and say, God promised, without any shadow of a doubt, no matter how dark it gets, no matter how bad it is, I'm never going to be back there on the slave ship being beat up against the walls, because I'm living a new life now. I'm making different kind of choices. I'm not wanderingly, aimlessly doing things that I shouldn't. I'm following Jesus Christ, doing the things he taught me I should. I'm walking a life of love and hope and servanthood. I'm putting myself last. I'm in a world now where there's goodness. Goodness from service and goodness from giving and goodness from loving the people around us. There's goodness in that. I have a good purpose in my life. And in that word, my hope is secured. So now all of a sudden, you've got two things in the fourth verse of Amazing Grace. I mean, really seriously, we should never sing this song again. I should be really excited about the first verse, the summary. I should be, real thoughtful in the second and the third verse. Yes, this is hard. On the fourth verse, I'm like, but you know, I've got two words. Number 4. Aren't you excited, sweetheart, that we're singing number 4? That's my wife sitting next to me, not my best friend. Aren't you excited that we've got to sing verse 4? It's coming up. Because in verse 4, there's two things that God promises to me. One, that there's going to be goodness, and 2, that I can be hopeful. It's worth singing this hymn just for this verse, just for this stanza. Because now your hope is secured. You found the Lord. More importantly, the Lord has found you. You chose the Lord, but more importantly, the Lord has saved you. And that's just flat out amazing. Flat out amazing. That the grace of God is given to me, despite the wretch that I've been. And now that I've made that call, found that God, I get to live with these two words sung right here in verse 4, hope and goodness. Now, It doesn't remove the second and the third verse. We should never, remember, I get a little perturbed when we don't sing all the stanzas of the verses, because guess what? We shouldn't remove verse 2 and 3, even though they're hard to sing. We shouldn't remove those verses that there's still dangers and there's still toils and there's still snares in the world. We shouldn't remove the idea here that in the midst of our heart still is fear about what tomorrow can give. But because I know the amazing grace of Jesus Christ, I know it. I've been found now. That moment's happened. This is what John Wesley talks about, the grace of moving on to sanctification, about being closer to God and this great world of God is. But along the way, it's not just about my devotion to the Lord. In return for my devotion, maybe just in this acknowledgement of what I'm opening my eyes to see now that I couldn't see before. Maybe I've put on the right glasses so I can actually see what God's put on around me. There is goodness and there is hope in this world, no matter how dark it gets. I've got 2 words. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as life endures. Let's talk about shield and portion. You know, when I choose to follow God, God's promised also to set me on a narrow path that's steep and arduous. Yeah, I like the word arduous. We get on this steep and narrow path, and along that path, we start devoting ourselves to things that are different than we did before. You've done this. You've lived this Christian life long enough to know. You know, I go to church because. I bet you've got a finish to that sentence. I bet we all do. I've got all kinds of finishes to that sentence. I go to church because my whole week is thrown off if I don't go to church. I go to church because those are my people, right? Those are the people that encourage me. I go to church because I find depth in a world that sometimes seems shallow. I go to church because I want to hear Michael sing a song. I go to church because I want to raise my hands in ecclesia and feel the passion and the hope and the love of the people around me. I go to church because you fill in the blank. You fill it in. You go to church because, and that thing that you find, friends, for me, that's what verse 4 is talking about. That's the shield. Right? It doesn't matter how bad my week was. I have never walked away from a Sunday morning. Never once in my 40 years of life. Of the 52 Sundays I went to church every single week, maybe missing a couple because I was ornery or a little belligerent or who knows, maybe just I was sick in bed. I don't miss those days. Why? Because in it I find a strength that God puts around me in you, in my family and my friends, all of us that used to be lost and now are found, and we sing a song together because of it. All of my friends, they have 2 words in their life, hope and promise. Hope and goodness. 2 promises that God gives us. Hope and goodness in my life right now. I get to have it. Friends, that's a shield for us. Because that means no matter what your day looks like, where you are in your life, that helps hold you together no matter what this world comes to. And if it's dark, maybe you need somebody else to say, nope, I see the little bitty pin light over there. Do you see it too? I see that little tiny twinkle of a star even in the midst of all the College Station lights that are trying to drown it out. Do you see it too? It's a shield, but it's also something that sustains us. Walking this path, living into amazing grace, not just receiving the grace of grace, living into amazing grace, right? Because remember, we're in a chronological path here. I was lost. I was wretched. I was deplorable. I could have even been like John Newton and disrespected people around me. You fill in the gaps. But now I've been found. And along that path of journey, along this chronological version, and we're in 4 now, a chronological version, I find hope and I find goodness along the way. And that leads me not only to find some security and a shield and people to surround me, it also allows me to be sustained. I mean, full on sustained in this world. are you sustained? Well, the word portion goes all the way back to Genesis, where God provides for Adam and Eve in the garden. But the word portion goes all the way back to Exodus as the people were wandering along the journey there in verse 4 of the Israelite journey, right? And that Israelite journey goes to like verse 476. So, I mean, it's early on, right? And I just made that number up. And as we're in verse 4, right, you're walking along the way here, and we're seeing what happens. We're moving along. But what happens when they get hungry? God sends bread from heaven called manna. God puts quail in the field. God leads them beside the waters that they need to sustain themselves. And God was their portion. Not bread and quail and water. Those are things God gave them. God was their portion. So we receive it. We summarize Amazing Grace in verse 1. 2 and 3, we establish that we need it. And when we find it finally, we receive a couple of words: hope and goodness that you get to find. And then we start walking along the journey, and though the world throws things straight at you and me, walking along the journey, and though we get bombarded, because we are set apart. Remember John 17, I'm going to leave you in the world, but I'm not going to take you out of the world, right? It's Jesus' prayer. So we're walking along. We've got a shield of these good people that are walking with us, shield of God's goodness and hope that's surrounding us. And while we're along the way, and this is where I hope you are in your journey this far, unless you've been a Christian for just 2 days, if you've been a Christian longer than that, and you start to get a little hungry and you start to say, God, I need something in the midst of all of this. God's your portion too. Not water, not bread, not quail, even though quail's pretty good. God is your portion. My shield and my portion will be. Let's kick it into verse 5. Yea, when this flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease, I shall possess within the veil a life of joy and peace. I told you it's chronological. Do you hear it now? I mean, we don't cut this verse 5 out of funerals. I mean, the hope is in verse 6. We're going to do verse 6 next week. It gets a whole night of its own. But we don't cut this verse out for funerals. We might cut it out for like a normal service. Once again, you're not ever going to see me cut any of these passages out now, because it's a whole story. And what you and I both know is, in this world, we only have so much time. Only so much that we can do. And then someday, it'll be over. We're losing a couple church members this evening as we speak. A couple of them are getting close to see Jesus. We're praying pretty deeply for those folks and their families right now. But as we pray for Dan and Ridley, we also know they live these God-loving, hope-filled lives. And they walked in their life with verse 4. They walked with those two words. Both Dan and Ridley did. The goodness of God. And they walked with the hope of God in their life. And what they both have always known as good God-fearing Christians that found amazing grace and acknowledged it all those years ago and have been walking this verse 4, walking through the dangers and the toils and the snares of the previous verse, and walking through all that happens. They've been surrounded by all these people, this love that God's given them, and now we surround their families here, and they surround their bodies here now with all this love and this hope. And someday, all of our flesh and hearts shall fail, and our mortal lives shall cease. But I still possess something within the veil, a life of joy and peace. I think when Jesus talks about us being separated in John 17, it is with this hope. It is with this goodness that on February the 4th, tomorrow, when I approach life, I could have a bad day. I might just have a bad day tomorrow. I hope not. I hope it's as good of a day as today was. I hope we have as much joy in our life as we do today. I could make a bad decision tomorrow that leads me off the path. I mean, even as a good person, I might choose tomorrow not to be better. Maybe I'm worse. Something that John Wesley always talks about is backsliding and how good people don't get to stay good people. We either get better or we get worse. Maybe I make a decision that hurts somebody else. Maybe I make a decision that makes someone else feel less than they are. Maybe I make a decision that, well, you know how that goes. But amazing grace is there to prod me, to push me, to lead me forward. That I remember and recall God's promise of goodness and hope in my life. And maybe it's just something that just happens that I don't have any control of, like COVID. And yet, goodness and hope are still there. Why? Because, my friends, we are moving towards something every single day, you and I. Whether it's a bad day or a good day, you and I really are moving to the better of this world. And our hope is that our life looks like this. Maybe we got a few dips, but our life is moving on this journey, on this graph like this, as we get closer and closer and closer to, well, we're not getting better for the heck of it. We're not letting our lives be transformed by amazing grace just for the sake of it being transformed. Our life is being transformed for one reason and one reason alone, so that we might be closer to God. And when it's all over, is it really over? Well, it's a great mystery, but it's not a mystery for you and for me. We've been promised. And in our life, I have been promised, and I can see it, the goodness of God. In my life, in my Christian journey, I've been promised, and I can feel it, the hope that's secured in my life because of God. And in my life, though I have yet to see it, I am sure that God has a plan for when my flesh and mortal life shall cease. We're moving on to something better. And is it really there? Well, we're going to leave that for next week, friends. It's on the burner for next week. I mean, this is the big reveal. This is, if Chip and Joanna Gaines could stand in front of the gates of heaven with the way your old life looked, they're going to pull it back, these two big boards, just like it is in Fixer Upper, and pull it back, and you're going to see something beyond what your old house looked like. And it's going to be better. But I think verse 5 is important for us, because not something that we're just hoping that happens when we get there. But what you feel right now, what we feel for both Dan and Ridley right now, for what we feel together right now in this hope and in this life and in this joy, that we have a promise. We felt the first two. You and I have seen it. We've felt it. We've lived it. Hope and goodness. And we believe in this third thing, that we are going to something better. Therefore, I will be better every single day, so that as I love to dream and to believe that probably the only difference between someone who gets into heaven by the skin of their teeth, as Oswald Chambers said this morning in the devotional, versus someone that's been living along this path of acknowledging amazing grace in their life every single day. You know, the only difference between those two people, if they both know who Jesus is, when they walk through the gates of heaven, this is the way I see it. God welcomes both of them with open and loving arms. And the only difference I believe that happens between the two people, for the one that acknowledged amazing grace in their life every day, heaven's less of a surprise than the one who just found Jesus. Because we've been seeing and living in parts and pieces of heaven all along the way. It's just a little less of a surprise. It's still going to be a surprise. I'm telling you, that reveal, it's coming, friends. It's coming next week. In verse 6 of Amazing Grace, not for you personally. But I think as we live and look into this, when we hold on to this hope right now, that in the dark days of a pandemic, sure, this mortal life's going to be over. Sure, we're all going to die. Yes, the news is correct. But you know what? There's another piece of news. That there's always something better for those of us that have faith, that we live with today on the other side. I hope tonight that as you live into verse 4 and 5, I hope that you too see your life like a journey, and that you're closer to the hope of 4 and 5 than you are to the troubles of 2 and 3. But no matter where you find yourself on this journey, and sometimes I think we relive some of these verses over and over again in our life. No matter where you find yourself on the journey, friends, we are marching on to something better, and maybe that's what's so amazing about the grace of God. I hope you have a great evening. I'm praying for you. I'm praying for the people in our church. I'm praying for the people that find themselves in these verses, which is all of us. And whether you're living by the skin of your teeth or whether, man, you're living those 3 promises every single day, I hope that this song gives you hope until we meet again on Sunday. I hope you have a great day. Know that we're praying for you. Enjoy C&J's barbecue tonight. I hope that was a good profit share. You still got time. It's just 8 o'clock. I think they're open until 9 o'clock. It's good to go if you want to go grab a profit share from us. But know that in your life and in mine, we have this incredible story we get to hold on to. Have some amazing grace tonight, and we'll see you next week.